The day started like any other, with the hum of my office at Ashgrove Equity filling the air, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, and the faint smell of coffee lingering from the break room. I was hunched over a spreadsheet, double-checking projections for a client, when my phone buzzed on the desk. The screen showed an unknown number, probably another cold call, but something made me pick it up. A man's voice came through, calm but official, introducing himself as Daniel Firth from First Valley Bank. He asked if I had a moment to discuss my mortgage on a property at 778 Rose Willow Lane. My fingers froze on the phone. Mortgage? I didn't own any property besides the apartment I shared with my wife. I told him he must have the wrong person, but he insisted, saying the loan was co-signed by me 6 months ago for her family. Her parents. Her sister. My stomach twisted like someone had yanked a knot tight inside me. I asked him to repeat the address, hoping it was a mistake, but 778 Rose Willow Lane wasn't a place I'd ever heard of. My voice stayed steady, though my pulse was hammering. I told him I never signed anything like that and asked for the documents. He sounded surprised, maybe even nervous, but promised to email them right away. I hung up and stared at my computer screen, the numbers blurring into nonsense. My wife, the woman I'd built a life with for 7 years, wouldn't do something like this. Would she? The thought felt like a betrayal just for thinking it, but doubt crept in like a shadow. I opened my email, refreshing every few seconds until Daniel's message appeared with a PDF attachment. There it was, a mortgage agreement with my name, my signature, my social security number, all tied to a house I'd never seen, for people I thought I knew. My chest tightened. I grabbed my phone again, this time dialing Julian Knox, my lawyer and the one friend I trusted to cut through chaos like this. He picked up on the second ring, his voice relaxed until I told him about the call. Stay calm, he said, but I could hear the edge in his tone. I'm coming to your office. Don't call her yet. He meant my wife. I agreed, though every instinct screamed to confront her right then. While I waited, I printed the document and stared at the signature. It looked like mine at a glance, but something was off, the way the C in my name looped too wide, the uneven stroke of the pen. I'd signed enough contracts to know my own hand, and this wasn't it. My mind raced. Had someone tricked her? Was she in trouble? Or worse, had she done this on purpose? The idea made my throat burn, like I'd swallowed something sour. Julian arrived in under 20 minutes, his tie slightly crooked from rushing over. He took one look at my face and knew I was unraveling. We sat in the office conference room, the door locked, and spread the papers out. He scanned them, his brow furrowing deeper with every page. This is bad, he said finally. It's not just your name on a mortgage. You're listed as the primary guarantor. If they default, you're on the hook for the full amount. I asked how much. He pointed to a figure, $450,000. My salary was good, but not enough to cover a hit like that without wiping out everything I'd saved. I leaned back in the chair, trying to breathe. Julian asked if I'd talked to her yet, and I shook my head. I didn't trust myself to stay calm. He nodded, like he understood, and suggested we dig deeper before making any moves. Let's get the bank on the phone again, he said. We need more details. I dialed Daniel back, putting him on speaker. He sounded cautious now, probably sensing trouble. I asked who else was on the loan. He listed her parents, Walter and Greta, and her sister, Allison. My jaw clenched. I'd never been close to them, but I didn't think they'd pull something this bold. Daniel said the payments were already 3 months behind, and the bank was preparing to escalate. I told him I never signed the document and demanded to know how it was approved. He stammered, saying it was processed through a notary, all standard procedure. Julian cut in, asking for the notary's name and any digital records. Daniel promised to send more files and hung up quickly, like he wanted to escape the conversation. I looked at Julian, my hands shaking. What do I do? He didn't sugarcoat it. First, we confirm the forgery. Then we protect your assets. After that, you'll have to decide what to do about her. Her. My wife. The woman who laughed at my terrible cooking, who planned our vacations with color-coded spreadsheets, who promised to stand by me no matter what. I thought of our wedding day, her smile brighter than the sun, and wondered how we'd ended up here. I wanted to believe there was an explanation, something that didn't mean she'd betrayed me. But the signature on that paper wasn't mine, and someone had put it there. Julian suggested I go home and act normal until we had more answers. I didn't know if I could. The drive back to our apartment felt endless, every red light a chance for my brain to spiral. When I walked through the door, she was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She smiled and asked how my day was, like nothing was wrong. I forced a smile back, my heart pounding so loud I thought she'd hear it. I said work was fine and excused myself to the bedroom, claiming I needed a shower. Under the hot water, I stood motionless, letting the steam cloud my thoughts. I kept seeing that signature, the clumsy imitation of my name tying me to a debt I didn't choose. I wanted to march out and ask her why, to demand the truth, but Julian's warning echoed in my head, don't tip her off yet. So I dried off, put on fresh clothes, and joined her for dinner. We ate in near silence, the weight of what I knew pressing down on every bite. She asked if I was okay, and I lied, saying I was just tired. After she went to bed, I sat on the couch, staring at my phone. Another email from Daniel had come through, more documents, more proof that my life was tangled in something I didn't understand. I forwarded it to Julian and shut my eyes, trying to remember when things had started to feel off. Had she been distant lately? Had I missed signs? The questions piled up, but one thing was clear, the woman sleeping in our bed wasn't the person I thought she was. Tomorrow, I'd start unraveling the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I woke up the next morning with a heaviness in my chest, like someone had parked a truck on my ribs overnight. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels too loud when you're carrying a secret. My wife was already gone, probably off to her marketing job downtown, leaving a note on the counter about picking up groceries later. I stared at her handwriting, the neat loops and sharp angles, and wondered if I'd see those same strokes in the forged signature that had turned my life upside down. I didn't touch the note, just grabbed my keys and headed to meet Julian at his law office. The drive gave me too much time to think, my brain replaying yesterday's call from the bank, the mortgage I never signed, the betrayal I couldn't shake. By the time I parked, my hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. Julian's office was a small, no-nonsense space cluttered with legal books and coffee mugs. He was already there, pacing with a stack of papers in his hand. He didn't waste time on small talk, just slid the bank documents across his desk and pointed to the signature page. Look at this, he said, his voice low but urgent. I leaned in, my eyes locking onto the scrawl that was supposed to be mine. It was close enough to fool someone who wasn't paying attention, but Julian had a sharper eye. He traced the C with his pen, showing how it curled too wide, how the lines wavered like the hand holding the pen wasn't sure of itself. This isn't just a bad imitation, he said. It's got her style all over it. I didn't need to ask who he meant. My stomach churned as I pictured her sitting somewhere, practicing my name on a scrap of paper, turning our marriage into a lie. Julian sat down, his chair creaking, and asked if I was ready to hear the rest. I nodded, though part of me wanted to bolt out the door and pretend this wasn't happening. He explained that the mortgage wasn't just for her parents' house, it tied in her sister, too, the one who always seemed to need a lifeline. They bought a place way beyond their means, banking on my credit to seal the deal. Your name was the golden ticket, Julian said. Without it, the bank would have laughed them out of the room. I asked why they needed a house like that, and he shrugged, saying greed or desperation, maybe both. I rubbed my temples, trying to process it. I'd always thought her family leaned on her too much, her parents calling for help with bills, her sister borrowing cash she never paid back. But this was different. This was calculated, like they'd sat around a table and decided I was their way out. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I flinched. Her face lit up the screen, her smile from a photo we took last summer at the beach. For a second, I wanted to answer and hear her say it was all a mistake, that she'd never hurt me like this. But Julian shook his head, reading my mind. Let it go to voicemail, he said. You need to stay focused. I did, but when the notification popped up for a new message, I couldn't resist listening. Her voice was bright, asking if I wanted pasta or stir-fry for dinner, like nothing in the world was wrong. I set the phone down, my hands shaking. Julian noticed, but didn't comment, just kept flipping through the documents. He pointed out dates, 6 months ago, when the loan was signed, and a few weeks later, when the first payment was missed. They didn't even try to keep up, he said. They knew you'd be the fallback. I asked how they got away with it, and he said a notary had stamped the papers, but it could have been someone careless or paid off. He was already working on tracking them down. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling tiles, and tried to remember what I was doing 6 months ago. Probably working late, trusting her to handle our life while I chased deadlines. The thought made me sick. Julian suggested we call the bank again, but before we could, my phone rang once more. This time it was her mother, a woman who always greeted me with hugs, but never quite looked me in the eye. I let it ring, my jaw tight. Julian raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. Instead, He pulled up a digital copy of the mortgage on his laptop, zooming in on the metadata. This was scanned at a public library, he said. Not exactly a master criminal's hideout. I almost laughed, but it came out more like a choke. I asked what we do next, and he said we start building a case, gather more evidence, lock down my accounts, and figure out how deep this goes. But you'll have to talk to her eventually, he added, his voice softer now. I knew he was right, but the idea of facing her made my skin crawl. I'd spent years building a life with her, sharing dreams, making plans, and now I was sitting here wondering if any of it was real. I told Julian I'd call her tonight, but I needed answers first. He nodded and handed me a list of steps. Freeze my credit, check my other accounts, get a forensic accountant if it came to that. I tucked the list in my pocket, feeling like I was arming myself for a war I didn't want to fight. As I left his office, the weight of it all settled heavier on my shoulders. I drove home, the city blurring past, and thought about what I'd say when I saw her. I wanted to believe there was a reason, something that didn't mean she'd thrown me to the wolves. But the signature kept flashing in my mind, that clumsy fake tying me to a debt I didn't choose. When I got to the apartment, her coat was on the rack, and the smell of garlic filled the air. She called out from the kitchen, asking if I was hungry. I stood in the doorway, watching her stir a pot on the stove, her hair pulled back like she didn't have a care in the world. My heart pounded, and I knew I couldn't wait any longer. We need to talk, I said, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. She turned, her smile faltering, and asked what was wrong. I took a breath, steadying myself. The bank called yesterday. About a mortgage. My name's on it. The room went still, her spoon frozen mid-stir. For a moment, neither of us spoke, but I saw it in her eyes, guilt, panic, something she couldn't hide. Then she set the spoon down and said, "We were going to tell you." My blood ran cold. We. Not just her, but all of them. I asked who "we" was, though I already knew. She started to explain, her words stumbling, but I cut her off. "Did you sign my name?" I asked, my voice low, dangerous. She didn't answer, just looked away, and that silence told me everything. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my hands clenched into fists. I didn't trust myself to stay. Not yet. I grabbed my keys and left, the door slamming behind me, her voice calling after me but fading fast. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was the guy they'd used, and I needed to figure out how to take my life back. I didn't go far after leaving the apartment, just drove aimlessly through the city, the streetlights flickering like they were trying to keep up with my thoughts. My wife's words kept looping in my head. "We were going to tell you." We. Her parents, her sister, all of them in on it, treating me like a pawn in some game I didn't know I was playing. I ended up at Julian's place, a cramped condo that smelled faintly of takeout and printer ink. He didn't ask why I was there at 10 at night. He just handed me a beer and said we'd figure it out. I didn't drink, just set the bottle on his coffee table and told him what happened in the kitchen. He listened, his face tight, and when I finished, he said, "We need to know how far this goes." I agreed, though part of me was terrified of the answer. We set up at his dining table, laptops open, papers everywhere, turning his place into a makeshift command center. Julian called in a favor from a cyber analyst he knew, a woman named Callie who worked at his firm. She showed up an hour later, her backpack stuffed with tech gear, her eyes sharp like she lived for this kind of puzzle. I explained the mortgage, the forged signature, and my wife's half-confession. Callie didn't flinch, just plugged in her laptop and started pulling data, credit reports, bank records, anything tied to my name. I watched her screen fill with numbers and codes, feeling like I was staring at my life being dissected. Julian kept me grounded, asking questions to keep my mind from spiraling. Had I noticed anything strange with money lately? Any weird mail? I shook my head, realizing how blind I'd been. I trusted her to handle our joint accounts, never questioning the bills she paid or the statements she filed away. Now, that trust felt like a rope around my neck. Callie made a noise, a sharp intake of breath, and we both turned to her. She pointed at her screen, where a credit card statement glowed in black and white. It was in my name, one I'd never opened, with a balance of $22,000. My mouth went dry. I asked what it was for, and she scrolled through the charges. Spa visits, online clothing stores, a jewelry boutique downtown. None of it was mine. I didn't even know what a hydrofacial was. Callie cross-referenced the purchase locations, her fingers flying over the keyboard, and found most of them linked to an IP address registered to a cafe near her sister's apartment. I didn't need to hear the name to know who'd been spending my money. I leaned back, my chair creaking under me, and tried to breathe. Julian asked if I was okay, but I didn't answer. How could I be? My life was unraveling, and every thread led back to the people I'd called family. Callie kept digging, her focus relentless. She pulled up my investment accounts, ones I'd spent years building for our future, and my heart stopped. They'd been flagged as collateral for private loans, not through the bank, but some shady lender I'd never heard of. I asked how much, and she hesitated before saying, 3 loans, total of $180,000. I stood up, pacing to keep from punching something. Those accounts were my safety net, my dream of retiring early, maybe starting a business someday. Now they were props in someone else's scam. I asked who took out the loans, but I already knew. Callie confirmed it. Her parents' names were on the paperwork, with my assets listed as proof they could pay it back. I thought of her father, always bragging about his big plans at family dinners, and her mother, nodding along like she believed him. I'd thought they were harmless, maybe a little desperate, but not this. Not thieves. Julian put a hand on my shoulder, steadying me. We'll lock this down, he said, but we need to move fast. I nodded, though my head was spinning. Callie suggested checking for digital footprints, like emails or logins tied to the accounts. I gave her access to my financial apps, my passwords, everything. It felt like handing over my soul, but I didn't have a choice. She found a trail almost immediately, logins from devices I didn't recognize, one of them a phone registered to her sister. I pictured her, always glued to her screen, smirking like she was untouchable. I wanted to drive to her place and demand answers, but Julian shook his head. Evidence first, he said. Anger later. He was right, but it didn't make the fire in my chest burn any less. As the night wore on, Callie uncovered more. A second credit card, smaller but still in my name, with charges for plane tickets and hotel stays. I hadn't traveled anywhere in months. The tickets were for a trip to Miami, a place her sister always talked about visiting. I remembered her showing off beach photos last Christmas, saying it was a work thing. Work. She didn't even have a steady job. I sat down hard, my legs unsteady. Julian poured me a glass of water, but I just stared at it, my reflection warped in the surface. I asked Callie how they got away with this, and she said it wasn't hard if you had someone's trust. They had your name, your info, your life, she said. All they needed was a way in. I thought of our apartment, the desk where we kept our files, the passwords I'd shared without a second thought. I'd handed them the keys to my world, and they'd walked right in. By 3 a.m, we had a stack of printouts, credit reports, transaction logs, even screenshots of login attempts. It was enough to bury them, but it felt like I was the one being crushed. I looked at Julian, my voice hoarse. What do I do now? He didn't hesitate. Protect yourself. Freeze everything. Cards, accounts, all of it. Then we confront them, but not until we're airtight. I nodded, but the thought of facing her again made my skin crawl. I'd seen the guilt in her eyes last night, but also something else, defiance, like she thought she could talk her way out. I wasn't sure I could stay calm if she tried. Callie packed up her gear, promising to keep digging. There's more here, she said. I'll find it. I thanked her, my voice barely above a whisper. Julian walked her out, leaving me alone with the mess on the table. I picked up the credit card statement, staring at the charges like they could explain why this happened. A $2,000 necklace. A $500 dinner. Things I'd never wanted, paid for with my name. I thought of our wedding, her hand in mine, promising forever. Had she been planning this even then? Or was it her family, pulling her into their mess? I wanted to believe she was a victim, too, but the signature flashed in my mind. That careful, deliberate forgery. She'd chosen this. Chosen them over me. I left Julian's place at dawn, the city waking up around me. I didn't go home. I couldn't face her yet, not without losing it. Instead, I drove to a diner, ordered coffee I didn't drink, and sat in a booth, staring at my phone. No calls, no texts, just the weight of what I knew. I opened my banking app, following Julian's advice, and started freezing accounts. Every click felt like cutting a tie, not just to her, but to the life I thought we had. By the time I finished, my coffee was cold, and the truth was clear. I wasn't just fighting for my money. I was fighting for my life. I spent the morning after leaving the diner in a haze, my phone off to avoid her calls or texts, though none came. The silence was worse than an argument. It felt like she knew I was onto her and was waiting me out. Julian had texted me to meet him at his office by noon, saying we had enough to confront them now, but I needed to see it through myself first. I drove to a copy shop and printed every piece of evidence we'd gathered. The forged mortgage, the credit card statements, the login trails Callie had traced. Holding that stack of papers felt like gripping a grenade. Pull the pin, and everything would explode. By the time I reached Julian's office, my nerves were raw, but I was ready. He looked at the folder and nodded, his face grim. "You sure you want to do this today?" he asked. I told him I had to. Waiting would only make it worse. He didn't argue, just grabbed his jacket and said he'd drive. We headed to her parents' house, the one place I knew they'd all be on a Saturday afternoon, probably pretending nothing was wrong. The whole way there, I rehearsed what I'd say, but every version ended with me shouting. I forced myself to focus on the road ahead, the familiar streets blurring past, each one tied to memories of her dinners, walks, moments I thought meant something. Now they felt like lies. When we pulled up to the house, a modest two-story with a sagging porch, I saw her car in the driveway, along with her sister's beat-up sedan. My pulse kicked up, but I kept my face blank. Julian stayed quiet, letting me lead. I grabbed the folder and walked to the door, my knock louder than I meant it to be. Her mother opened it, her smile fading when she saw me. She tried to hug me, but I stepped back, asking if everyone was home. She nodded, her eyes darting to the folder, and called for the others. I walked inside, the smell of fresh bread hitting me like a punch. Her family always acted so normal, so warm, even now. They were in the dining room, seated around a table with plates of sandwiches and iced tea, like it was just another weekend. My wife looked up, her face pale but composed, and her sister smirked before catching herself. Her father stood, offering his hand, but I ignored it and sat down, Julian beside me. The air felt thick, everyone waiting for someone else to speak. I didn't give them the chance. I opened the folder and started laying out papers one by one. The mortgage with my forged signature, the $22,000 credit card charges, the loans tied to my investments. I kept my voice steady, though my hands shook, and described what each document showed: dates, amounts, proof they'd used my name without asking. I watched their faces shift, her mother's eyes filling with tears, her father's jaw tightening, her sister staring at the table like it could save her. My wife stayed still, ascot-like, her breath catching in her throat. I didn't look at her, just kept going, explaining how my name was used to buy a house I didn't know about, how my credit was trashed, my savings put at risk. I told them about the missed payments, the bank's threats, the digital trails leading back to them. My voice stayed cold, factual, but inside, I was burning. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they'd done, to see the life they'd tried to steal from me. When I finished, the room was silent, the only sound her mother's soft sniffles. I leaned back, crossing my arms, and waited. My wife spoke first, her voice small, saying they didn't mean to hurt me, that they were desperate, that the house was supposed to be a fresh start. She said they planned to tell me once things settled. I almost laughed, the kind that hurts more than it heals. I asked how forging my name was supposed to settle anything, how racking up debt in my name was a fresh start. She didn't answer, just looked at her hands, twisting a napkin into knots. Her mother jumped in, her voice wobbly, saying they thought I'd understand, that I was family. She reached for my arm, but I pulled away, my chair scraping the floor. I told her family doesn't lie like this, doesn't steal. Her father finally spoke, his tone sharp, saying I was overreacting, that it was just paperwork, that they'd fix it. He leaned forward, like he could bully me into backing down, but I didn't flinch. I told him the bank wasn't waiting for their fixes, that my accounts were frozen, my credit shot, because of them. I pointed at the papers, saying every line was a crime: forgery, fraud, theft. Her sister, who'd been quiet until now, muttered something about real estate pressure, like that explained it. I turned on her, asking what pressure justified spending $22,000 on spa days and jewelry with my name. She shrank back, her face red, and didn't answer. I let the silence sit, heavy and suffocating, before laying out my terms. They had 24 hours to go to the bank and admit what they'd done, every detail, every lie. If they didn't, I'd file charges myself, and Julian would make sure it stuck. I stood, gathering the papers, and looked at each of them, one by one. My wife's eyes were wet, but I didn't soften. I told them this wasn't just about money, it was about trust, about the life I thought we had. I said I wasn't their piggy bank, wasn't their fallback plan. I was done. Julian stood too, his presence solid behind me, and we walked out without looking back. The door clicked shut, and I heard her mother sob, her father's low curse, but it didn't pull me back. Outside, the air was cold, cutting through my jacket. but it felt clean compared to the staleness in there. I got in Julian's car, my hands clenched in my lap. He didn't say anything, just started the engine and drove. I stared out the window, the houses blurring into streaks of color, and felt something shift inside me. I'd walked in that house as a husband, a son-in-law, a brother-in-law, hoping for answers that would fix things. I walked out as none of those, just a man with a folder full of truth and a fight ahead. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably one of them trying to plead, but I didn't check. I didn't owe them my time anymore. Julian glanced at me, his voice quiet. You did what you had to. I nodded, though it didn't feel like enough. Confronting them hadn't fixed the hole they'd ripped in my life. It just made it real. I thought of our apartment, the bed we shared, the photos on the walls, and wondered if I could ever go back. Every memory was tainted now, every promise a question mark. I asked Julian to drop me at a hotel instead of home. He didn't argue, just changed lanes and headed downtown. I leaned my head against the window, the glass cool against my skin, and tried to picture what came next. The bank, the police, maybe a courtroom. Whatever it was, I wouldn't let them drag me down with them. I'd fight for my name, my money, my future, not because I wanted to, but because they'd left me no choice. By the time we reached the hotel, I was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't stop. I checked in, dropped the folder on the desk, and sat on the bed, staring at the blank wall. I wasn't sure who I was anymore, but I knew one thing. I wasn't their scapegoat. Not now, not ever. I barely slept in that hotel room, the lumpy mattress doing nothing to quiet my racing thoughts. Every creak of the building sounded like a warning, like the walls themselves knew the mess I was in. By morning, my eyes were gritty, but I was wide awake when Callie called, her voice sharp with urgency. You need to see this, she said, not bothering with a greeting. I told her I'd meet her at Julian's office in an hour, then showered fast, the hot water doing little to wash away the dread. I grabbed the folder of evidence, my constant companion now, and checked out. The clerk's cheerful, have a nice day, almost laughable. Driving through the city, I kept my phone off, not ready to face whatever messages might be waiting from her or her family. Their 24-hour deadline to come clean was ticking down, but I didn't trust them to do it. Julian's office was already buzzing when I got there. Callie hunched over her laptop, Julian pacing with a mug of coffee he wasn't drinking. She didn't look up, just waved me over and spun her screen toward me. My chest tightened as I saw what she'd found. A website for something called Rose Willow Investments, sleek and professional, with my name plastered across it as the lead advisor. I'd never heard of it, never authorized it, but there I was, my photo lifted from a work conference, next to a bio claiming I'd managed millions in tech startups. I sank into a chair, my legs unsteady. Callie clicked through the site, showing testimonials from clients I'd never met, promising returns that didn't exist. I asked who was behind it, though I already knew. She pulled up domain records, pointing to a registration tied to her father's email, the same one he used for his endless business ideas. I rubbed my face, trying to keep my anger from boiling over. Julian stopped pacing and asked how bad it was. Callie didn't sugarcoat it. She traced payments from the site to a bank account linked to her parents, small deposits at first, then bigger ones, totaling over $300,000. I felt sick, picturing her father shaking hands with strangers, using my name to sell them lies. I asked where the money went, and Callie showed a trail, some to the mortgage, some to her sister's credit card, some vanishing into cash withdrawals. It wasn't just the house. They'd built a whole scheme around me. Julian's jaw was tight, his voice low. This isn't just betrayal, Cole. This is wire fraud, identity theft, maybe even a financial conspiracy. I nodded, the words heavy but not surprising. I'd spent years thinking her family was just flaky, always chasing get-rich-quick dreams. But this was different, calculated, cold, criminal. I asked Callie how they pulled it off, and she said my name was the key. You're a finance guy with a clean record, she explained. Your reputation made it believable. I thought of all the late nights I'd put in at Ashgrove, building that reputation, and now it was a weapon against me. But Callie wasn't done. She opened another file, her fingers hesitating like she knew this would hit harder. There's something else, she said. My stomach dropped as she showed a job application submitted to a hedge fund in Chicago, using my resume, my degrees, my certifications, my entire career. The applicant? Her sister. I stared at the screen, my breath shallow. She hadn't just stolen my money, she was trying to steal my life. Callie pulled up more. Emails from her sister to recruiters, posing as me, even a faked LinkedIn profile with my name but her photo. I remembered her at family dinners, always complaining about bad luck with jobs, never mentioning she was forging my credentials to get ahead. I wanted to call her right then, scream until she understood the damage, but Julian put a hand on my arm. "We're close," he said. "Don't give them a chance to cover their tracks." I nodded, though my hands were shaking. Callie kept digging, pulling up loan applications tied to the fake investment site, each one listing me as a guarantor. I asked how many people got sucked in, and she said at least a dozen, maybe more, based on the payment logs. I pictured strangers handing over their savings, trusting my name, not knowing it was a lie. The guilt hit me hard, even though I hadn't done this. I asked Julian what we could do, and he said we'd start with the bank, then go to the police, but we needed to warn the victims, too. "This is bigger than your family now," he said. "People are getting hurt." I thought of her mother's tears yesterday, her father's bluster, and wondered if they'd even care about the lives they'd ruined. Callie found one last piece, a brochure for the fake investment fund, printed and mailed to local retirees. My name bolded as the trusted expert. I imagined her father handing them out at the country club, smiling like he'd cracked the code to wealth. I asked Callie how she found all this so fast, and she shrugged, saying fraud leaves footprints if you know where to look. "Your in-laws weren't exactly masterminds," she added, almost smiling. I wished I could laugh, but the weight of it all was crushing me. I looked at Julian, my voice rough. "How do I stop this?" He didn't hesitate. "We shut down the site, freeze their accounts, and turn this over to the feds. But you need to decide how far you're willing to go." I knew what he meant. Pressing charges would mean her, too, not just her family. I thought of her wedding vows, her hand squeezing mine, and felt a pang I couldn't ignore. But then I saw the resume, the website, the lies piling up, and knew I couldn't let it slide. I told him to do whatever it took. He nodded, already pulling out his phone to call a contact at the district attorney's office. Callie started drafting a report, her focus unbreakable. I sat there, staring at the papers, my name screaming back at me from every page. I'd spent years building a life I was proud of, and they'd turned it into a con. I thought of our apartment, the couch where we'd watched movies, the kitchen where she'd cooked last night, acting like nothing was wrong. I couldn't go back there, not now, maybe not ever. My phone was still off, but I didn't need to check it to know they hadn't gone to the bank like I demanded. They were probably huddled together, planning their next excuse. I stood, needing to move, and paced the small office. Julian glanced up, but let me be. I stopped at the window, staring at the street below, people walking like their worlds weren't falling apart. I envied them. Callie's voice broke through, saying she'd found another email, one from her sister to her father, talking about expanding the fund. They weren't stopping. They were doubling down. I turned back, my resolve hardening. "Shut it all down," I told her. She nodded, already typing. Julian hung up his call, saying the DA was interested but needed more before moving. I told him to give them everything, every document, every screenshot. I didn't care about the fallout anymore. They'd crossed a line I couldn't forgive. As the afternoon faded, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath me. I'd walked into this thinking it was just a mortgage, a mistake I could fix. Now I was staring at a syndicate wearing my name. I didn't know who I'd be when this was over, but I knew one thing. I wasn't their victim. I was their reckoning. I left Julian's office feeling like I'd been hollowed out, the weight of everything Callie found pressing against my ribs. The drive to First Valley Bank was a blur, my hands tied on the wheel, Julian in the passenger seat with a briefcase stuffed with evidence. We'd called ahead, and Daniel, the bank rep who'd first tipped me off, was waiting. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew this was the moment to lay it all bare. No more waiting for her family to come clean. The bank's lobby was cold, all glass and polished floors, making every step echo like a warning. Daniel met us at the reception desk, his tie slightly crooked, his face tense. He led us to a private office where two others waited, a branch manager named Sandra and a fraud investigator, Tom. I glanced at Julian, who gave a small nod, his way of saying we were ready. But ready didn't mean calm. My pulse was racing, and my mouth felt dry as I set the briefcase on the table. Before we could start, the door opened, and there they were, my wife, her parents, her sister, all filing in like they'd been invited to a negotiation. I froze, my stomach twisting. Julian leaned close, whispering, "Stay focused. They don't control this." I nodded, but seeing her face, pale, eyes darting, made it harder to breathe. Daniel looked confused, asking why they were there. Her father spoke first, his voice loud, saying they wanted to clear up a misunderstanding. I almost laughed, but it caught in my throat. Sandra, the manager, cut him off, saying the bank had questions about the mortgage and my involvement. That's when I opened the briefcase and started pulling out papers. Every forged document, every credit card statement, every screenshot Callie had dug up. I didn't look at them, just spoke to Sandra, my voice steady despite the fire in my chest. I explained how my name was on a mortgage I never signed, how my credit was used for loans I didn't authorize, how my reputation was hijacked for their fake investment scheme. I laid out the timeline, the digital trails, the website with my face on it. Julian took over when I paused, pointing to the signature analysis he'd had done, showing how the forgery matched my wife's handwriting, not mine. He showed IP logs tying the credit card purchases to her sister's devices, bank transfers to her parents' accounts. The room was silent except for the rustle of papers and Sandra's pen-scratching notes. Tom, the investigator, asked if I'd ever agreed to any of this, even verbally. I said no, my eyes flicking to my wife for the first time. She looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. I wanted her to say something, to admit it, but she didn't. Her mother tried next, her voice shaky, saying they thought I'd approved it, that it was a family decision. I cut her off, sharper than I meant to, asking how forging my name was a family decision. Her father jumped in, his face red, saying I was blowing it out of proportion, that they'd pay it back eventually. I pointed to the mortgage statements, 3 missed payments for $150,000 hanging over my head, and asked how they planned to pay that when they were already drowning. He didn't answer, just crossed his arms and glared. Her sister stayed quiet, her usual smirk gone, her eyes fixed on the table like she could disappear into it. Sandra asked for specifics on the forgery, and Julian handed over a report from a handwriting expert, detailing every mismatch in the signature. I watched Tom's face harden as he read it, his pen tapping the table. I told them about the fake investment site, the job applications in my name, the loans tied to my accounts. I said it wasn't just about the house, it was my entire life they tried to take. My wife finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, saying they didn't mean to hurt me, that they were desperate, that the bank pressured them. I turned to her, my voice low but cutting. You signed my name. You lied for months. How's that the bank's fault? She flinched, tears welling up, but I didn't stop. I told her I'd given them 24 hours to confess, and they hadn't, so here we were. Her mother started crying louder, saying they were good people who made a mistake. I looked at her, really looked, and saw someone who'd played the victim so long she believed it. I told her good people don't steal identities, don't ruin lives. The air felt heavy, like everyone was holding their breath. Sandra leaned forward, asking if I wanted to press charges. I hesitated, just for a second, thinking of the woman I'd loved, the promises we'd made. But then I saw the papers, the lies stacked in front of me, and knew there was no going back. I said yes, my voice firm, and Julian added that we'd be contacting the police and the DA with everything we had. Her father stood, his chair scraping, and tried to loom over the table, saying I'd regret this, that I was tearing the family apart. I stood too, meeting his eyes, and said he'd done that himself when he used my name to scam people. He sat back down, deflated, like the fight had gone out of him. Her sister finally spoke, her voice small, saying it wasn't supposed to go this far, that they thought I'd never find out. I almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered the $22,000 in spa charges, the fake resume, and any pity vanished. I told her it didn't matter what they thought, it was done. Tom broke the tension, saying the bank would launch an internal investigation, starting with the notary who'd stamped the papers. He said all accounts tied to the mortgage were frozen, effective immediately, and they'd be contacting federal regulators. Sandra added that the bank would cooperate fully, her tone clipped, like she was already calculating the fallout. I nodded, thanking them, though it felt hollow. This wasn't a win, it was just the start of a bigger fight. As we packed up, my wife reached for my arm, her touch light but desperate. Can we talk? She asked, her eyes pleading. I pulled away, shaking my head. You had your chance, I said, and walked out, Julian behind me. Her family stayed seated, their voices rising as the door closed, arguing, blaming. But I didn't care. Outside, the air was sharp, the sky gray like it was holding back a storm. Julian clapped my shoulder, saying I'd handled it well, but I didn't feel it. I felt like I'd just burned down my life and was standing in the ashes. I asked him what happens next, and he said the bank's investigation would move fast, maybe a week before they turned it over to the cops. He said we'd need to prep for legal steps, maybe testify. I nodded, my mind already racing ahead. I thought of our apartment, the life we'd built, and knew I couldn't go back there tonight. I told Julian I'd stay at the hotel again, and he offered to come with me, but I said I needed to be alone. He didn't push, just told me to call if I changed my mind. Driving away, I kept seeing her face, the tears, the guilt she couldn't hide. Part of me wanted to believe she was trapped, that her family had forced her into it, but the signature kept flashing in my mind, her hand, her choice. I pulled into the hotel lot, my hand shaking as I turned off the engine. I sat there, staring at the dashboard, the reality sinking in. This wasn't just a fight with her family, it was a war, and I was in it alone. But I wasn't backing down. They'd taken enough, and I was taking my life back, one truth at a time. I woke up in the hotel room to my phone buzzing like an angry wasp, the screen showing Callie's name. It was barely 7, the sky outside still bruised with dawn, but her voice was wide awake, sharp with something new. They've been running a mini Ponzi scheme, she said, no preamble, no softening the blow. I sat up, my head foggy from another night of broken sleep, and asked her to repeat it, hoping I'd misheard. She didn't hesitate, laying it out like a punch. Her family had used my name, my investment records, to lure people into a fake tech portfolio, promising returns that never existed. I gripped the phone, my knuckles white, and asked how bad it was. She told me to meet her at Julian's office, saying it was worse than we thought. I dressed fast, skipping the shower, and grabbed the folder of evidence that now felt like part of me. The drive was a haze, my brain stuck on her words, Ponzi scheme, a term I'd only heard in news stories about con men, not my own life. Julian's office was quieter than usual, just Callie at her laptop, her fingers moving like they were chasing something. Julian wasn't there yet, but she didn't wait, spinning the screen to show me emails, bank transfers, and a spreadsheet she'd built overnight. My name was everywhere, on brochures, pitch decks, even a fake quarterly report claiming 15% returns. I sank into a chair, my legs unsteady, as she explained how her father had targeted elderly neighbors from their country club, people with savings but not much tech savvy. He'd sold them shares in a fund he claimed I ran, using my job at Ashgrove to make it sound legit. I asked how much money was involved, and she pointed to a number, $1.5 million. My stomach lurched. I pictured her father, all smiles and handshakes, promising wealth while pocketing their cash. Callie showed me more text messages from victims, forwarded to her by a contact at the bank. One was from a widow who'd invested her husband's life insurance, $200,000 gone. Another was from a retired teacher who'd lost his entire pension, asking why Mr. Harwood hadn't returned his calls. I wanted to throw up, my name tied to their pain like a brand. I asked how they kept it going, and Callie said it was simple. They paid early investors with new money, just enough to keep the scam alive, while funneling the rest to their own accounts. I thought of the mortgage, the credit cards, her sister's trips to Miami, all funded by people who trusted my name. I rubbed my face, trying to stay calm, but the guilt was crushing, even though I hadn't done this. Callie didn't pause, pulling up bank records showing transfers to offshore accounts, one linked to her mother's email. I'd always thought her mother was just along for the ride, nodding at her father's plans, but now I saw her as complicit, signing off on lies with the same ease as my wife's forged signature. I asked Callie if the bank knew, and she said they were starting to. Her contact had flagged suspicious activity after our meeting yesterday, but this was bigger than a bad mortgage. I thought of Sandra's face, the way she promised a full investigation, and wondered if they'd move fast enough. My phone buzzed again, a number I didn't know, and I let it go to voicemail, too raw to deal with anyone. Callie kept digging, finding a draft email from her sister to a new investor, pitching the same fake fund, dated just last week. They weren't stopping, even after I'd confronted them. I wanted to drive to their house and smash their laptops, but I knew that wouldn't fix this. I asked Callie what we do now, and she said we had to warn the victims and get the feds involved fast. I nodded, though the thought of facing those people, explaining I wasn't the man who'd robbed them, made my skin crawl. Julian arrived then, his tie loose, his eyes bloodshot like he'd been up as late as me. I told him about the Ponzi scheme, my voice flat, and he cursed under his breath, saying we'd need a bigger legal team for this. He asked if I was ready to go public, to tell the victims the truth. I didn't know if I was, but I said yes, because hiding wouldn't help them or me. Callie printed out a list of names from the text messages, 17 people, each with a story, each tied to me through her family's lies. I read them slowly, my fingers tracing the paper, trying to memorize everyone. There was a man who'd planned to buy a boat, now penniless, a couple who'd lost their daughter's college fund, a woman who'd trusted Mr. Harwood because he sounded honest. I felt like I was drowning, their losses piling on top of my own. Julian suggested we start by contacting the victims privately, offering what we knew before the police got involved. I agreed, but the idea of those conversations, explaining I'd been betrayed, too, felt like walking into a fire. Callie offered to draft a letter, something we could send to each person, laying out the fraud without promising money we didn't have. I thanked her, my voice hoarse, and asked how she stayed so calm. She shrugged, saying she'd seen worse in her line of work, but her eyes were soft, like she knew this was different for me. I stood, needing to move, and paced the small office, the carpet muffling my steps. I thought of our apartment, the life I'd left behind, and wondered if I'd ever feel safe again. Every memory was tainted now, her smile, her touch, all part of a mask. I stopped at the window, staring at the city waking up, people heading to jobs, to lives that weren't unraveling. I envied them, but envy wouldn't fix this. I turned back to Callie, asking if we could trace the offshore accounts, maybe get some money back. She said it was possible, but slow: courts, lawyers, international laws. I nodded, knowing justice wasn't quick, but I'd fight for it anyway. Julian was on the phone now, talking to his DA contact, his voice low but urgent. I caught words like federal, seizure, indictment, and felt a strange mix of relief and dread. This was real now, no turning back. I sat down, picking up the victim list again, and read the widow's message one more time. She'd written, "I trusted you," and it cut deeper than anything her family had done. I wasn't the thief, but I was the face they'd trusted, and that made me part of their pain. Callie finished her draft letter, sliding it across the table. It was short, clear, explaining the fraud, my stolen identity, and promising updates as we worked with authorities. I read it twice, my throat tight, then told her to send it. She hesitated, asking if I was sure, and I said I was, though my hands were shaking. Julian hung up, saying the DA was moving faster than expected, already pulling records from the bank. He said we'd need to meet with them soon, maybe tomorrow, and I'd have to tell my story again. I nodded, exhausted but resolute. I thought of her family, probably plotting their next move, thinking they could outrun this. They couldn't. I'd make sure of it. As I left the office, the list of names in my pocket felt heavier than the folder ever had. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for them, too. I got in my car, the engine's hum steadying me, and drove toward the hotel, knowing sleep wouldn't come. My life was a battlefield now, but I wasn't surrendering. Not to her, not to them, not to the lies they'd built on my name. I walked into the courthouse 3 weeks later, my shoes echoing on the marble floor, each step heavier than the last. The air smelled of wax and old paper, like every bad decision ever made was trapped in the walls. Julian was beside me, his briefcase stuffed with the evidence we'd spent weeks building: forged documents, bank records, victim testimonies, all pointing to the fraud her family had spun around my name. Callie's work had cracked the case wide open, and now it was time to face the consequences in a courtroom packed with people I didn't want to see. My stomach churned, but I kept my face blank, knowing they'd be watching for any crack in my resolve. Julian leaned close as we reached the courtroom doors, his voice low. "Stay steady. We've got this." I nodded, though my hands were clammy, and pushed through the doors. The room was half full: lawyers, a few reporters, victims I recognized from Callie's list, their faces drawn and tired. And there, at the defendant's table, sat my wife, her parents, her sister, all in stiff suits like they could dress up their lies. I avoided her eyes, focusing on the judge's bench instead. It's dark but solid and unyielding. We took our seats, Julian spreading out papers, ready to present our case to the assistant DA, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel who'd been prepped on every detail. The hearing started with a bang, Rachel calling me to the stand first, her questions cutting straight to the heart of it. I stood, my throat tight, and swore to tell the truth, the words feeling heavier than they should. She asked how I learned about the mortgage, and I told the story: Daniel's call, the forged signature, the house I'd never seen. My voice stayed even, but my hands gripped the stand, that would cool under my palms. I described the credit cards, the fake investment site, the Ponzi scheme that had sucked in $1.5 million from people who trusted my name. Rachel handed me documents to confirm, and I pointed out every lie: the signature that wasn't mine, the emails from her sister's phone, the brochures with my face. The courtroom was quiet, just the rustle of papers and the judge's pen scratching. I glanced at the victims, their eyes on me, some nodding, some crying, and felt their weight on my shoulders, even though I hadn't stolen from them. Rachel asked if I'd ever consented to any of it, and I said no, my voice firm, cutting through the room. I told her I'd confronted them, given them a chance to confess, and they'd lied again. I didn't look at my wife, but I felt her there, her presence like a shadow I couldn't shake. When Rachel finished, their lawyer, a slick guy named Bennett, tried to twist it. He asked if I'd ever discussed finances with my wife, implying I might have overlooked an agreement. I shut him down, saying I'd never agreed to anything, that my name was forged, my accounts hijacked without a word. He backed off, his smile faltering, and I stepped down, my legs shaky but my head clear. Julian went next, laying out the evidence like a map, signature forensics, IP logs, bank trails Callie had traced. He showed how her father had pitched the fake fund, how her mother had signed off on transfers, how her sister had spent the money on luxuries while victims lost everything. He read from the widow's letter, her words about losing her husband's insurance choking the room. I saw a juror wipe her eyes, and even the judge's face tightened. Their lawyer tried to interrupt, but Julian kept going, his voice steady, piling proof until there was no room for doubt. Then came their turn, and it was chaos. Her sister cracked first, standing to testify and blaming her parents, saying they'd pressured her, that she just followed orders. Her voice shook, her hands twisting, but I saw no remorse, just fear of getting caught. The judge cut her off when she rambled, telling her to stick to facts. Her mother went next, sobbing so hard she could barely speak, claiming they were desperate, that they thought I'd help family. I clenched my jaw, remembering her tears at the dinner table, the same act with no substance. Her father didn't testify, just sat stone-faced, his lawyer whispering furiously in his ear. My wife was last, and I braced myself as she took the stand, her eyes red but dry. She spoke softly, saying she never meant to hurt me, that she thought the mortgage would save her family, that she'd planned to tell me later. She didn't mention the Ponzi scheme, the credit cards, the lies that went beyond one bad loan. Rachel cross-examined her, asking why she'd forged my name if it was so innocent. She had no answer, just looked down, her hands folded like a child caught stealing. I wanted to feel something, anger, pity, anything, but all I felt was empty. The hearing stretched into hours, their lawyer trying to paint them as misguided but good-hearted, while Rachel dismantled every excuse with more evidence. I watched the victims' faces, their pain raw, and knew this wasn't just about me anymore. When it was my turn to speak again, I stood, my voice stronger than I expected. I read the list of victims' names, one by one, each syllable heavy, 17 lives damaged because my name was a lie they trusted. I looked at her family and said they hadn't just stolen from me. They destroyed futures, broken trust, used my reputation to hurt others. I said they never asked, never warned, never cared. The courtroom went still, the air thick with the truth. The judge called a recess, and I stepped outside with Julian, the hallway cooler, but no less heavy. He said we'd done enough, that the DA had what they needed, but I didn't feel done. I thought of the victims, waiting for justice, and her family, still clinging to their lies. I asked Julian if it'd be enough to convict, and he said it was strong. Fraud, conspiracy, theft, all backed by hard proof. I nodded, but the victory felt hollow. I'd wanted answers, maybe an apology, but all I got was more betrayal. Back in the courtroom, closing arguments were quick. Rachel summed it up, calculated fraud, deliberate theft, no remorse. Their lawyer tried to spin it as a mistake, but his words fell flat, the evidence too heavy to lift. The judge didn't rule yet, saying she'd need time, but her tone was sharp, her eyes on them like she already knew. We left as the room emptied, her family huddled with their lawyer, not looking at me. Outside, the air was crisp, the city moving like nothing had changed. Julian offered to grab dinner, but I said I needed to be alone. I drove to the hotel, my hands steady now, the list of victims' names still in my pocket. I sat on the bed, staring at the folder, the truth it held. I thought of her on the stand, her voice small, and wondered if she'd ever really loved me or if I was just a means to an end. The question hurt, but I didn't shy away from it. I'd faced her family, their lies, their crimes, and I was still standing. The courtroom had been a circus, but it was also a turning point. Justice wasn't a maybe anymore. It was coming, and I'd helped bring it. I lay back, the ceiling plain but calming, and felt something shift. I wasn't their husband, their son-in-law, their Mark. I was just me, and for the first time in weeks, that felt like enough. I closed my eyes, not expecting sleep, but ready to face whatever came next, knowing I'd fight for every inch of my life they'd tried to take. I stood outside the courthouse again, 2 months after the hearing, the November air biting through my coat as I waited for the sentencing. The last weeks had been a grind. More meetings with the DA, more victim statements, more evidence piling up like bricks in a wall I couldn't see over. Julian had warned me the case was airtight, but standing there, watching people stream in, I felt the weight of it all pressing down. My life had been carved up by her family's lies, and now I'd see what justice looked like. Inside, the courtroom was packed, the same mix of reporters, victims, and curious strangers, their murmurs buzzing like static. I sat with Julian near the front, my hands folded to keep them still, the folder of evidence tucked away in his briefcase. I didn't need to see it anymore. It was burned into my mind, every forged signature, every stolen dollar. The judge entered, her face unreadable, and called the room to order. I glanced at the defendant's table where they sat, my wife, her parents, her sister, all in muted clothes, like humility could be borrowed for a day. I avoided her eyes, focusing on the judge's gavel as it fell, signaling the start. Rachel, the assistant DA, stood first, summarizing the case with a voice like steel: fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, elder abuse, $1.5 million in damages across 17 victims, all tied to my stolen name. She listed the crimes with precision, each one landing like a stone. Wire fraud for the fake investment site, forgery for the mortgage, theft for the credit cards. I heard a victim behind me stifle a sob, and my jaw tightened. Rachel didn't linger, just asked for maximum penalties, saying their lack of remorse made it clear they'd do it again if they could. Their lawyer, Bennett, tried to soften it, arguing they were desperate, not malicious, that prison wouldn't fix the harm. He mentioned my wife's cooperation, though she'd barely admitted anything, and I felt a flicker of anger at his spin. The judge cut him off, saying she'd heard enough at the hearing, and moved to sentencing. I braced myself, my hands gripping my knees, as she called her father first. Walter stood, his shoulders squared like he could still charm his way out. The judge didn't flinch, sentencing him to 17 years, 10 for fraud, 7 for conspiracy, plus restitution of $1.5 million. His face crumpled, the bravado gone, and I felt nothing, just a cold clarity that he'd earned it. Her mother was next, her hands trembling as she stood. The judge gave her 12 years, 8 for fraud, 4 for theft, calling her complicity equally damaging. She collapsed into her seat, sobbing, but I didn't look. Her sister followed, her face pale, her smirk long gone. 10 years, 6 for identity theft, 4 for fraud, because she'd used my resume, my name, to chase jobs and spend money that wasn't hers. She didn't react, just stared at the floor, and I wondered if she finally understood what she'd done. Then came my wife, and the room seemed to shrink, the air too thick to breathe. She stood slowly, her hands clasped, and the judge read her sentence: 8 years, 5 for forgery, 3 for conspiracy. The words hit me harder than I expected, not because I felt sorry for her, but because they marked the end of who we'd been. The judge added that all their assets, bank accounts, properties, the offshore funds Callie had traced, would be liquidated to pay victims, though it wouldn't cover everything. I heard a victim whisper, "Thank God," and my throat tightened, knowing it wasn't enough, but it was something. The judge's voice stayed steady, saying their crimes weren't just financial. They'd broken trust, preyed on vulnerability, used my name to hurt others. She looked at me briefly, her eyes sharp but not unkind, and I felt seen, like she knew what this had cost me. As she finished, my wife turned, her face wet with tears, and spoke directly to me, her voice breaking. "You ruined our family." The words stung, sharp and raw, but I didn't hesitate, looking her in the eyes. "No, you sold it out." My voice was calm, final, and I saw her flinch like she'd expected me to crack. The gavel fell, and the bailiff moved in, handcuffs clicking as they were led away. Her mother's sobs echoed, her father's head hung low, her sister shuffled silently, but my wife glanced back one last time, her expression unreadable. I didn't meet her gaze, just turned to Julian, who nodded, his face tight but proud. We stood as the room cleared, victims clustering around Rachel, some crying, some thanking her. A few approached me, an older man shaking my hand, saying he'd get part of his pension back because of me. I mumbled something about being sorry, but he waved it off, saying I'd fought for them. I didn't feel like a hero, just a man who'd lost everything to find the truth. Outside, the air was colder, the sky gray like it was holding its breath. Julian suggested a drink, but I shook my head, needing space to think. I drove to the hotel, the city blurring past, my mind replaying her words, "You ruined our family," like they could still cut me. But they couldn't. I'd spent months unraveling their lies, facing their betrayal, and now they were gone, locked away for years. I parked and sat in the car, my hands loose on the wheel, the silence heavy but not suffocating. I thought of our wedding, her laugh, the promises we'd made, and let them go, like ashes scattering in the wind. They weren't mine anymore. I got out, the folder still in my bag, but lighter now, like it had served its purpose. Inside the hotel room, I dropped it on the desk and sat on the bed, staring at the plain walls. I'd expected to feel relief, maybe anger, but all I felt was quiet, a strange, steady quiet, like the world had stopped spinning just for a moment. I pulled out the victim list from my pocket, worn from weeks of carrying it, and read the names again. They were why I'd fought, not just for me, but for them, the widow, the teacher, the couple who'd lost their daughter's future. I folded the paper and tucked it away, knowing I'd carry them with me, not as guilt, but as a reminder of what mattered. The sentencing wasn't the end, restitution would take years, and some victims might never recover, but it was a line drawn, a door closed. I thought of her family, each in their own cell now, and wondered if they'd ever understand the wreckage they'd left. I doubted it. They'd built their lives on taking, not seeing who they hurt. I wasn't like them. I'd stood up, spoken the truth, and walked away, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I lay back, the ceiling blurring, and felt something new, not peace, not yet, but a spark of strength, like I was starting to know who I was without them. The phone stayed quiet, no calls, no texts, just me and the future I'd have to rebuild. I closed my eyes, not expecting sleep, but open to whatever came next. I'd face the worst they could do and come out standing. That was enough for now, enough to keep going, enough to start again. I woke up in my new apartment, a small one-bedroom I'd rented after leaving the hotel, the kind of place that felt more like a fresh start than a home. It had been 6 months since the sentencing, and the world had moved on, though I was still finding my footing. The morning light slanted through the blinds, catching specks of dust in the air, and I lay there for a moment, letting the quiet settle. No phone calls from banks, no lawyers, no ghosts of her family, just me, figuring out what came next. I got up, made coffee, and checked my email, half expecting another legal update, but instead found a message from Callie, asking if I was ready for today's meeting. I smiled, something I hadn't done much lately, and typed back that I'd be there. Today wasn't just any day, it was the first official meeting of Ledger Light, the nonprofit Callie and I had started to help people like the victims of her family's scam. I dressed simply, jeans and a button-down, and grabbed my notebook, the one where I'd scribbled ideas for the group late at night when sleep wouldn't come. Driving through the city, I felt lighter, the streets familiar but not haunted anymore. I'd spent so long looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next blow, but now I was looking forward, building something that mattered. Callie was waiting at the community center we'd rented, a low brick building with folding chairs and a coffee urn that smelled like it had been brewing since dawn. She waved me over, her laptop already open, her energy as sharp as ever. We'd named the nonprofit Ledger Light because it sounded hopeful, like a beacon for people lost in financial betrayal, and today we'd meet our first group, 12 people, some victims of her family, some from other scams, all looking for a way to rebuild. I helped set up, arranging chairs in a circle, feeling nervous but steady, like I was finally doing something right. As people trickled in, I recognized a few faces from the courtroom, the widow who'd lost her husband's insurance, the teacher who'd trusted my name. They smiled, not the forced kind, but real, like seeing me meant something. I shook their hands, my voice softer than it used to be, and thanked them for coming. One man, older with deep lines around his eyes, grabbed my arm as he sat, his grip firm. "You saved my retirement," he said, his voice thick. I started to say it wasn't just me, that Callie and Julian and the DA had done the heavy lifting, but he shook his head, saying my fight gave him back half his savings. I nodded, my throat tight, and took my seat, the room filling with quiet expectation. Callie kicked things off, explaining what Ledger Light was about: education, support, helping people spot fraud before it took everything. She was good, clear without being pushy, and I watched the group lean in, nodding, some jotting notes. Then it was my turn, and I stood, my notebook unopened in my hand. I hadn't planned what to say, but the words came anyway, simple and true. I told them I'd been where they were, not just a victim, but someone who'd trusted the wrong people, who'd lost more than money. I said I'd thought strength was holding a family together, keeping promises no matter what, but I'd learned it was something else, knowing when to walk away, when to stand up, when to say enough. The room was quiet, just the hum of the heater in the corner, and I felt their eyes on me, not judging, just listening. I talked about the mortgage, the forged signature, the Ponzi scheme, not to relive it, but to show them they weren't alone. I said we'd teach them how to check their credit, spot red flags, protect what was theirs, and if they'd already lost something, we'd help them fight back. I promised no miracles, just tools and time, and saw a few heads nod, a few shoulders relax. After, we broke into smaller groups, Callie handing out packets on financial basics, how to freeze accounts, read statements, avoid scams. I sat with the widow and two others, answering questions, my voice steady even when they asked about her family. I didn't dodge it, saying they were in prison now, that the system had worked, though not perfectly. The widow asked if I hated them, and I paused, surprised by how easy the answer was. I said I didn't, not anymore. Hate took too much energy, and I was done giving them that. She smiled, like she understood, and I felt a weight lift, like I'd let go of something I hadn't realized I was carrying. The meeting ran long, people lingering to talk, share stories, even laugh a little. I watched them, this group of strangers who'd become something more, and felt a spark of pride, not for me, but for what we were starting. Callie caught my eye as we cleaned up, her grin saying she felt it too. Driving home, I thought about the man who'd thanked me, his words echoing louder than her voice ever had. I'd spent months thinking I'd failed, that her betrayal had broken me, but standing in that room, I saw it differently. I hadn't just survived. I built something new, something that could outlast the wreckage. At home, I sat at my small kitchen table, the notebook open now, pages filled with ideas for Ledger Light, workshops, hotlines, maybe a website. I'd taken a new job, too, directing a victim restitution program at a local charity, using what I'd learned to help others claw back what was stolen. It paid less than Ashgrove, but it felt right, like my life was finally mine again. I thought of the apartment I'd shared with her, the photos we'd hung, the plans we'd made, and realized I didn't miss them, not the way I used to. They were gone, like a house I'd lived in but didn't own anymore. I opened my laptop, pulling up the victim list I still kept, not in my pocket now, but saved on my desk. I read their names, not as a burden, but as a promise to keep going, keep fighting, for them and for me. The widow had hugged me before leaving, saying she'd bring a friend next time, and I smiled, knowing we were just starting. I leaned back, the chair creaking, and looked out the window at the city lights, steady and bright. I thought being strong was saving her, saving them, but it wasn't. It was saving everyone else they'd hurt, and maybe myself along the way. I didn't need her apology, her family's regret, or the life we'd lost. I had this, Ledger Light, the people we'd help, the truth I'd fought for. I stood, stretching, and grabbed a glass of water, the coolness grounding me. The road ahead was long, restitution was slow, some victims still struggling, but I wasn't alone. Callie was in it with me, Julian a phone call away, and the group growing every week. I thought of the teacher, his nod when I'd promised to keep fighting and knew I would. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I turned off the light, the room dark but not empty, and went to bed, the notebook on the table, open to a blank page. Tomorrow, I'd fill it with more ideas, more steps, more ways to rebuild. I wasn't her husband anymore, wasn't their Mark. I was just me, and for the first time, that was enough. I closed my eyes, the city humming outside, and let sleep come, knowing I'd wake up ready not for her, not for them, but for everyone else, and for the life I was making, one choice at a time.